Gee, I was hoping that John would do this improv, but not, huh? Here's
Believe how
Nora.
light it is out.
I know, and as I opened two of my windows and I can hear my neighbors talking
Oh,
in the yard.
So we are live, and I just let Norm into the meeting. So you guys are all set to begin.
thanks,
Thanks
Jim.
very much. Good evening and
Thanks,
welcome
Jim.
to the April 8th meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. This meeting of the Northborough CPC is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth from the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the town of Northborough has been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of the Northborough Community Preservation Committee are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows Northborough CPC to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. And members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to Northborough Remote Meetings on YouTube via the link listed on the town website. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting is not a public hearing, but we will have comment from those allowed in. Welcome, members, and thank you for making time to come. We have a pretty brief agenda, the primary item being a discussion of White Cliffs. Prior to that, let's see, do we have Jim yet? No? Can I ask that we review the minutes, get that item out of the way? That would be the March 5 minutes.
I move we approve the minutes, March 5th.
I second that motion.
Excellent. Any discussion?
No.
Very good. I'll need a vote by roll call. Leslie,
Aye.
Millie,
Aye.
Andy Dowd.
I was not present.
That's right. Sorry. Peter Martin,
Aye.
Todd Helwig,
Yep.
Andy Clark,
Yes.
and John, me. Yes. Thank you. Minutes are approved. Got that out of the way. 5 years ago this month, we brought to the town the prospect that we would preserve White Cliffs rather than let it go to possible demolition and development. And the town supported it surprisingly strongly. There clearly was a passion in town to keep White Cliffs active and the hope that it could be brought to a productive use again in some form. We had a White Cliffs committee that formed and reviewed the path forward. A consultant, architectural firm, and so on was assigned. It's my understanding that their final report was published in December 2020. I had not read it or been alert that happened, but Norm Corbin forwarded me the link. And I did forward that to the committee tonight, just in case you had not seen it. I browsed it myself. What I would like to do in our time at this meeting is I'd like to learn from those representatives on the committee, which I believe is Todd and Norm. Norm was a member of the CPC at the time that the White Cliffs was approved by the town and subsequently served on the committee, to my understanding. And I'd like to have an update from what the committee saw of the consultant's report and conclusions. And then I'd like an open discussion on people's input, feelings, opinions on how we as a committee and how the CPA might play a role going forward. There's clearly going to be a need for more funds if something at all is going to happen with White Cliffs. So Todd, if I could ask you to take over and give us a brief summary of what happened and where you think things stand, if that's okay?
Sure. So, it's always a little hard to judge because there was a time when we were having the in-person meetings and then the pandemic happened and then, people's focus got other places. But my sense before we sort of went into lockdown was that there was a sort of a perception that this was taking too long. And I've always sort of resisted that urge because this is complicated stuff that we're working with here. And
May I
where I
interrupt?
like to start,
May I interrupt for a quick second? Sorry,
Yeah.
Jeff's waiting to be brought in. Sorry, Todd.
it's all right. I'm going to just lose my spot and I'll never be able to recover it now.
Sorry. I don't know
Um,
if you heard that, Jim, but Jeff Leland is waiting to be allowed in.
So I only still see the Gene Hendricks in the waiting room.
Oh, boy. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Todd.
So where I like to start is if you go back 5 years, the building was in imminent danger, right? And we took quick action to take the votes necessary, get the thing under agreement, and then buy it, right? And so once we bought it, we gave ourselves the time to kind of thoughtfully deliberate how this thing was going to unfold. So the emergency situation has passed, and we're now in this period, which might be taking longer than some would wish, but I think is necessary to evaluate, correctly and fiscally in a fiscal responsible way as to how we're going to solve this problem. Now, if you also remember, the money that we allocated didn't just pay to buy the property. We've also used that money to hire the architect that prepared the report, and they did other things as well, which we're going to talk about. One of the things that we had to do was learn a lot about the building, the mechanical systems that were in the building. We had this, and I don't know how many people saw it, but they did a laser scan of the inside of the building so that it's all been sort of digitized, and they can turn that into construction documents if ever we need that in the future. The roof was replaced. We replaced some of the flashing and the crickets around the chimneys that were causing some water infiltration. There was some historic fire damage that was done in the roof that had been replaced. And there was some damage to the dormers that had been replaced, that was corrected. And all of that was done to sort of correct the building envelope and keep the water from getting in to prevent further damage. So again, I like to think that we acted quickly to save the building, and then we acted equally quickly to keep it from getting further damaged, right? So as it sits right now, it's protected and it's generally weatherized, all right? That doesn't mean it's inexpensive to keep running, but we're even in its current state because you still got to heat it and everything else. So there is a monthly draw on the money that we have, and I couldn't tell you what it is, but it's not a costless situation. So once we got to the point where the property was stabilized, we then started to consider what the reuse options were going to be. And we had asked the architect to prepare, some options for us to think about. But the goal of any reuse plan was going to be not that the town was necessarily going to fund all of the cost of restoration, but that we would find somebody who would be able to take on the building and as part of their business would be able to rehabilitate it as part of the business. Now, there was probably always going to be a thought that there was some sort of support by the town, right? Some sort of financial support, whether it was from the CPC or from some other source of revenue, I don't know. But there was always a concept, right? That there was going to be a business person that was going to come in, or a company. They were going to rehabilitate it, and they were going to rehabilitate it as part of their business model, and preferably have some sort of continuing access to some of it, right? So that was what we did. The thing that I don't think anybody was prepared for, and this is the thing that has really kind of slowed down the thinking of this, in addition to the pandemic, is that the range of options to reuse it is going to require an investment of anywhere between $11 and $30 million, right? That is a staggering amount of money. The cost to restore it, sort of minimally restore it, is $7 million. And so the struggle, and we're going to go through this, is from the various business propositions that might take place at that property. They're starting off with a $7 million hole to rehabilitate that building into something that they can use, right? So then we start to go through what some of the reuse options were. And we did come up with one that was sort of the most, or the architects did. Nobody ever really voted on anything, but the architects came up with a proposal, not a proposal, a reuse option that made the most sense. Arguable whether it's financially workable, but anyway, let's go through the options. So one of them was a residential proposal, and the residential proposal was sort of a condominium-like development. Now, you couldn't chop the building up itself into White Cliffs into 3 or 4 units and somehow come up with $7 million to renovate it, plus the cost of doing the construction for the units. You would have to build other buildings on the property, right? So the estimated cost of doing this was like 20 million bucks. And that includes the cost of rehabilitating White Cliffs, maybe having some of it as a function space. Think of it like a common building for a rec center for a condominium project, right? So there would be other buildings that would have to be constructed on that site, 3, 4, 5 of them. So it would dramatically increase, it would dramatically change the character of that property, certainly from what it was historically, in order to create the revenue, sort of like condominium common area fees, to be able to support that building. And this option doesn't look viable because there's no one's going to pay. If the number of units that we could build on the property aren't going to be worth enough to carry the cost to rehabilitate and build the whole thing. There's just no one's going to pay $2 million for a condominium unit on Main Street in Northborough for the privilege of then using that space. So I don't think there was a lot of belief that was going to be an option. The next one that was considered was sort of the cultural not educational, but sort of the museum, the house museum concept, right? And here again, so even if nobody did anything, right, it was going to cost $7 million to rehabilitate the building and to restore it into something that would be functional and usable and that you want to look at. The problem there is there's no nonprofit that's standing ready that's going to jump in and rehabilitate the building for $7 million. Even if the town took on the task and said, here's a check for $7 million to restore the building, there's no nonprofit organization out there that would then be able to come up with the money to run it on an annual basis. And as we look around, the Commonwealth, there aren't many house museum type places that survive, right? Most of them are actually going away or getting absorbed into the trustees of reservations. So there was not a lot of thought that this was going to be a cultural thing that people were going to look at. The next option was municipal use. The idea was kind of floated around out there that you could have it become the new town hall, right? That the White Cliffs itself would be a sort of a gathering space that would be maybe have some offices in it, but you would still have to build a giant office building on the back of it, right? And so that was the $30 million option, right? So that is a massively expensive town hall, probably, and I'm not keeping up on the town meeting or the town hall renovation construction costs, but this is probably on the high end of doing that. And the other problem with doing that is the town hall is it's not in the center of town, right? People now wanting to encourage people right in the center of town, walkable, that kind of thing. This was a little bit outside, right? So that was pretty much discounted as far as I can tell. The next option was the commercial office concept. And you have to think about this a little bit like the residential option, was that you would be looking for a developer who would be buying the property, and they'd have to build enough offices to generate enough rent to pay for not only the buildings that they're going to lease, but also the $7 million to renovate White Cliffs. And the fact about commercial office leasing is, well, right now, nobody's really interested in commercial offices. And then the other problem is that nobody builds commercial office space, or they rarely build it on this scale on speculation, right? So generally, when you have if you had a company that was interested in it, you would build all of the office space for that one company because you knew you had a tenant ready to go. It is very unlikely we would have a developer who would buy this property and propose to build commercial leases or commercial office space on the hope that someone would then come in and rent it at the rent rates that they would need to make a profit, pay for the buildings, and renovate White Cliffs. So there was not a lot of belief that that was going to be a successful option either. The last one, and this is the one that seemed to be most, got the most traction, it's also the most obvious, is that it is some sort of hospitality or event space, right? Whether it's like a function place for weddings like it was before, or a restaurant or something, that seemed to be there was the most market demand for that, or at least there was prior to the pandemic, which is when most of the report was done. But even then, the cost to do that was estimated to between $11 and $15 million, right? So $7 million of that cost was the cost to renovate White Cliffs, to bring it up to some sort of, to replace the historic character. And then the delta, the $4 to $8 million was what would be cost to do the extra cost to make it a function facility. The reason for the range was whether or not you were going to build an addition to the building or whether you were going to have a commercial kitchen. The lower end of the numbers, the $11 million figure, sort of assumed that you were just going to have the White Cliffs. Maybe there would be a tent that would be seasonal for some sort of seasonal events that were out there, but it assumed that you did not have a kitchen and that you were going to be bringing in catering from someplace else, right? So then when you look at the universe of people who might be interested in taking on this kind of endeavor, they're probably not going to have $11 to $15 million or the wherewithal to borrow $11 to $15 million in order to make a business like that successful, particularly at the front end of the business, of whatever the business is, unless they're extremely well known already. They've got lenders already. They've got a track record. If it's somebody else, they're gonna have to sort of build up to something that they could do, right? So even in that situation, it would almost seem that the town would have to give a large amount of support to the building in order to get it up to a place where somebody could actually make some payments to the town. And eventually, as the business got better, the town would have less and less of a role, right? That was sort of the thought behind that space. And that was it's not quite we did talk about some other things, but those are sort of the broad stroke categories. And the problem with each one was the dollar figure, really. And so the question, and we have not yet gotten to the question is, where do we go from here? And my committee doesn't have an answer for this yet, is, do we hire a broker? Do we set out a request for proposals to get people in to see what kind of interest we have? Is this even the right climate in order to do that? Do we need to wait a period of time for that? Even if we were to do that, what amount of money would we need to be supporting for the town? Would town meeting even support a giant number like this? Would CPC support a number like that, right? Because if we were to $7 million, we'd basically have no job but to vote for the White Cliffs bond issue for the next 5 years. That would be we'd come meet once a year and we'd vote for the bond, and that would be it. That's all I got.
First question, a little outside the box. Was a historic preservation document ever developed, and was it ever executed to this point?
And the reason is we don't necessarily want to constrain ourselves yet as to the options as to what might happen to it. Eventually, we're going to have to do it, but we don't want to tie our hands yet as to what that document would say.
Well, not the, playing the devil's advocate side. What if you don't ever do it? does that mean we were ineligible to use the CPA in the first place, right? Or
You mean
it would make the purchase ineligible if we don't restrict it historically.
Well, yeah, I
Or
suppose.
the town pays for it without the CPA money.
Well, there's always, I believe, there's always going to have to be a historic preservation restriction on that property. However, I am not in favor of even contemplating what it would look like until we know what the end user is, right?
No, I guess
Because whoever the end,
I was only asking for the full range of possibilities of that property. You know, I mean, what I'm hearing is the town is stuck in a spot where a path forward there's no easy path forward. There's no cash cow. And what might be all the range of things. And so what am I saying? Is there some possibility that the property is kept, even part of the building is kept? I don't know, but we're talking about the estimates that are required to occupy it and keep it restored, right? Is there any alternate scenario to completely
give it
occupying
back?
it?
Say we're sorry, you can
back.
have it back?
Chop some of it off? I mean, I don't know. Was anything outside the box ever thought about?
No, not at this time.
Fair enough.
If I may, Todd, isn't the town administrator trying to pull together a request for proposals? That was the last meeting we had. He was going to work with someone, I can't remember the name, but someone that was on the DBBW team was going to come in and help write a request for proposal to see what options might be out there. Is my memory correct, Todd?
No, I think that I don't, we definitely talked about that. I just don't know in the crush of other things that were going on at town hall and the other pandemic stuff. I don't know that this has risen to the top of the pile, and understandably so, in my view.
I can see why it might have been delayed. I agree, but I think the concept was that was the next step.
That would have been the next step but we would have had to have spent we would probably have to have a couple of meetings to try to shape what that RFP would look like. Who is the business we're looking for? And again, even if we do that, we would have to hire somebody to do that for us out of the money, we might get nobody.
Yeah.
Right.
But
How much confidence do you
still have
have
to
in
do it, but yeah.
how much confidence? Oh, go ahead.
Leslie?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Leslie.
How much confidence do you have in that $7 million? You didn't say it enough times. I think it was 7. I wasn't quite clear.
7.
I know, I'm just kidding.
I know.
How much confidence do you have in that number? That seems really high.
I can assure you that every time we met, John was pushing back on how high that number was. I don't have any personal experience in these things, but I have no reason to believe that it is not a probably lower figure than it would ultimately be when you had to do it. Because one of the things we talked about, when they first came back to us, right? This is a little bit of the lore of the whole process. When they first came back to us with the kind of the concept, we immediately pushed it back and said, "There's no way we're doing this. So come back with what they called preservation light proposal," right? Which was sort of do as little as possible, and that's how we got to $7 million.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, thanks.
And John or to Norm, in my notes from the last meeting when we were actually able to meet in person, which is the last time that the reuse committee did meet. But John was meaning John Kader. He was going to look into how much it would cost to have someone prepare an RFP. So it wasn't actually the preparation of the RFP, but to start looking into, as that's one of the possibilities that we could pursue. And then, Todd, you forgot to add in, this is like in light of all the millions, the cheap cost, well, just to fix the chimney, which we haven't done yet. I mean, to replace the chimney is $100,000. So I mean, and that's the least
Well,
expensive.
We're running with the big dogs now, so start cutting your checks.
What would the request for proposal be for? For
It would-
the
it would
restoration
probably-
work?
No, it would be for a company, organization, individual with a business plan that would utilize the building. And part of the plan would be to be a partner with us in restoring.
The person that was interested before from Shrewsbury, is she still in the picture at all?
No, that's long gone. No.
Okay.
These numbers are looking at a certain part of the population that we haven't really had exposure to. Just as a side note, I think most of you are probably aware in Southborough, the Bartlett Mansion that had been being worked on. Do you remember that was supposed to be, planned to be torn down with, the mansion was going to be torn down with some small house, some additional houses put on the property. Anyway, they also did a CPA to get some funding. I think they went to about $1 million. And the owner decided to turn it into a bed and breakfast. I spoke to him about a month ago to understand where he was and how that was working for him. He decided because of COVID, he's turned it into a single family home and he's moving in.
Oh my God.
This is a different type. These are different people with different financial resources.
Yeah, I'll say.
I really think the RFP has to go to people like that something's tickling their fancy, their pockets are really crazy deep, and they do something out of the ordinary. I don't think I'm optimistic that we may find someone like that, but this is, it's a whole different ballgame. And when I spoke to him, his buddies do things that are not the kind of thing I would ever have the money for. So I'm still optimistic. I think there's a surprise out there. It might be a while before we find it.
I mean, developers, $30 million sounds like a lot for us and our budgets and stuff, but a developer may look at $30 million. But again, they're going to take like a 20-year expectation on that kind of investment. And there's no way that single building is going to return anything close to justifying that kind of investment. So if in opening this thing up, everyone has to wrap their head around that there's going to be addition to make that viable, even in the, having it as a wedding facility or something like that, a wedding facility that holds 50 people is not, it's not going to be a viable alternative either on that $7 million. So everyone has to wrap their head around that property is going to have probably a significant component of new development to it. Whether how it looks and all that is to be determined. But I don't think anyone, just that beautiful little white building sitting on a hill and all the nice little trees and sculptures and stuff like that being left the way it is, that can never be a part of the solution, because there's just no way that it's going to return enough on it. So you're going to be looking at like a building that may have a facility and a restaurant and some office and 12 or 20 units of condos or something like that on it, but there's no way that anyone is going to, the money itself for a developer isn't necessarily the problem. It's the 15-year payback on that kind of investment, because they're not going to take a 40-year view on that. That's not where they make their money. So it could be affordable housing, but you're gonna, you could put the units in there and have that, like you said, as a thing, but then it's going to be apartments all around that place. It doesn't even have to be affordable. It could be a market rate. I just don't even know if CPC funds could be used, or if we're using it for restoration of the building, can the rest of it be then developed at a commercial rate that does not preclude some sort of other, bringing in some other tenants of the CPC?
if I can just add something, John, about the residential use. The option that they explored that you know, again, is probably not, you know, fiscally possible for someone to do, but there would only be 2 units in White Cliffs, because we would want the whole purpose is to keep some, well, not the whole purpose, but to keep some town access to some space. So we had discussed that the first floor would somehow be public space, and the second and third stories would be, you know, converted into residential units. And given the square footage and what the market, you know, the rents are, and it would only allow for 2 units in there. And then the estimate is that there would then be an additional 20 units, you know, on the property.
I was just browsing some of the floor plans that are in the architect's report. And when you look at it, I had not really realized, but the area of all the additions seems to be much greater than the original property. And if the restoration estimates are based on the entire square footage, you know, was there ever an alternate path discussed? You know, what if certain additions were demolished, which were not historically significant, leaving the main property at a more affordable restoration price, which is the most attractive part maybe of an event space, or a smaller event space, or a restaurant, or obviously you still need a kitchen, but just curious about that.
So I believe some of the renovation costs, and Norman can probably correct me on this if I'm wrong, pretty much all of it included taking down the additions and sort of bringing it back to its original state. And then maybe building on some of them, you saw there might be something out the back that you would be hidden into the landscape, so you wouldn't quite see it as much. But the front piece would be brought back to what it was supposed to look like.
That's my recollection. It's essentially save the mansion in the added on function rooms, which actually the part of the building that are in the worst physical condition. The plan, I think, was they probably would come down.
And there was a lot of discussion on the committee with our consultant about whether or not we as the town should take those additions down now. And, you know, would that would that help to entice somebody? But when it came down to it, the cost of for the town to remove those additions versus what we felt was most important, which was getting the building weather tight, those additions remained.
Well, that sounds fair. I mean, Todd's description before of taking care of the most urgent items, you know, and that was a reasonably efficient process is true. But again, so is it fair to say if the 7 million figure for the minimum restoration, that a significant portion of that is demolition, or you know, what is it? Is it 1 million of it maybe? And then where do you remember the majority of the other costs coming from? Is it just the accumulation of restoration upon restoration and work to bring up to code and so on, or was there one major area that stuck out?
I do not know the answer to that question.
I know code was really the big issue, more so than restoration. The building's in good shape, other than the electrical, plumbing, and heating and air conditioning and the infrastructure, that kind of thing. It's structurally sound. So I think it's code more than anything else.
I don't think that, oh, sorry, Norm.
If you look at the report, there's a 2-page review. I think it's about a 2-page letter, essentially, when they had someone walk through for the plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. And I think it was a little simplistic, but essentially it said it's all got to go.
So for what we're calling preservation light, this $7 million is, I don't have it broken down by cost, but it's removing most of the additions, restoring the exterior, but only as needed. Because there are some people that are thinking, do we restore it back to exactly how it was? And it, which is pretty different looking than what it is right now. And then also the, as Norm had said, the code updates and new mechanical and new plumbing. And that's the basic plan for that comes to the $7 million.
Wow. Well, okay. So thank you, Norm and Todd, for bringing us up to speed.
Just don't play the lottery, okay?
What?
Mega Millions, big bucks, come on. Play the lottery, help us out.
Well, back to your point, Norm, that, we need to find people with deep pockets and I guess a love of restoration. Is there a network that can be explored, without this RFP, so to speak, but is there a network that can be explored of, these kinds of extravagant possible benefactors? And, who would do that work, right?
That would be a nice list I would like to have, but I don't have that list.
Yeah, they would have been involved. I mean, certainly when they were trying to sell the property in the first place, that was always a potential for someone to buy it and make their private estate, but
Perhaps.
it's not, we're not Wayland or someplace where that somebody might see $7 million is like, yeah, no problem. I'll buy that,
I guess more to the point, we're not, we're not in the South End. We're not in San Francisco. It's, it's maybe not the place where a wealthy person would decide to create, a mansion out of an old mansion.
We're getting up there. There's a lot of $1 million homes for sale in Northborough now.
7 million homes?
Yeah, that's on the high side for sure.
I guess we are close to
Todd,
Southborough.
you had mentioned the trustees of reservations. Is that conceivably a plausible option?
I mean, I don't know. I was on the board at Fruitlands when Fruitlands was acquired by the trustees of reservations, and Fruitlands had the problem with Fruitlands Museum was that they couldn't raise enough money to keep it sort of going on its own, and it needed that other thing. But when Fruitlands got absorbed into the trustees, it was fully functional, fully staffed, everything was restored.
Right. They have resources.
They do have resources.
So John, what do you want our committee to accomplish tonight?
Well, I think the next part of the discussion, what I was going to lead into is, do any members have other ideas of direction that we might throw back to the White Cliffs Committee and to the town administration, or any vision of how CPA can contribute? More restoration would qualify under CPA, but that's about it, right? We've already bought the property, and I don't think, any new building on the site or anything else is not, other than being an affordable housing thing, which doesn't really seem very practical. There's not much other use that CPA can contribute. So,
Well, the problem we're going to run into is there's, even as it sits right now, we've got carrying costs, right? And those carrying costs are being paid for from the original fund. And when that fund is drawn dry, I'm not sure where I'm not sure where the funds come from to pay the security and the heat and everything else, the electric bill and all the rest of it. And the
You don't have any
insurance.
sense of the balance of, I believe it was in the neighborhood of 600,000 additional on top of the purchase price. Is that about right?
It was something like that, but we paid for the architect, we replaced the roof, that other work was all done out of that. I mean, I think there's still a pretty good cushion left.
Yeah,
But-
there is. I know they showed us the budget last time we met. I don't have it at my fingertips, but there's still some substantial monies left.
Do we have a sense of how much time that buys us?
I think as of December, there was only 190,000 from the CPA allocation remaining.
But if that's 1/3 roughly of what was allocated at town meeting 2016, I mean, that isn't bad. I thought maybe it was long gone. But that's just another year's carrying cost, maybe, or maybe 2 years. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Where I personally am coming from is that our committee supported it, granted the town voted for it, but we were the promoters, and now we've gone to town meeting and it's been a pretty easy sell. Hey, we have to pay this on the bond. It's getting to a point where there will be those asking what's going on with it. What are we doing with the money that we're spending, even though we pitched it that with CPA we could afford it, and it's still true, but to what end? So I'm thinking of the next town meeting and whether we've got to say anything new. If not this town meeting, then a future one. I feel like we're going to be asked to speak to what the plan is, and I don't see a plan. That's the purpose of tonight's meeting, if you will, toward the town meeting presentation part of it. Because if we previously we said we're working on a reuse plan, and none of the plans seem the least bit viable without a large pocket developer or an idea that hasn't quite been hatched. And if we believe the architect's report, very thorough report, you have to assume their educated estimates. There doesn't seem to be much backing down from it, or some halfway path.
I'm going to make a comment here that I hopefully won't come back to bite me. If there was a disappointment I had not with DBVW, but with the contractor that did the analysis, the cost analysis for the different options. When we looked at DBVW, they did a lot of this type of work where they've done restorations and renovations and put add-on buildings and things like that. I guess my regret, the question I didn't ask at the last meeting was, why didn't he give us an example that could work? And rather than just give us examples that couldn't work. I guess I would have liked him to think outside the box. Is it because we needed to have extra grant money? We needed to have some kind of special fundraising? I mean, he's gone through this before, and that's probably the only thing I wish I had a better handle on. There's some unique things certainly with this property, but it's people that are in this field. I just kind of wish he gave us what we would have needed to do to get more funding and that kind of thing. I just, to me, that was a loose end that I wish we would have been able to address. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, the report seems to conclude in a number of sections that, without additional funding, you can't go forward with this and that. So,
I guess I would have liked him to say, give us examples of funding. Where have successes been? Where have you got the $5 or $6 million? Was it deep pockets? Was it fundraising? Was it? And that's kind of the loose end that wasn't addressed at the end. That was my disappointment.
It's the CPC.
Yeah, I mean, they assume that the municipality is going to find a way toward the funds, and that doesn't sound like an amount that the town of Northborough would go for by itself, yeah, can CPC contribute? But, you know, we're talking 3 times the purchase price for the minimum restoration. That's insane.
I think that's why it was up for sale in the first place, right? So, I mean, I don't know, I think most of us at least went in with an awareness that just from there was the alternative that they came up with, it was tear it down and build something new, you know, and that's the most viable option. I mean, if you want to think outside the box, that's the box that makes the most sense and is the most economically viable. It's the structure itself is beautiful, but it has no, the intrinsic value or the functionality that comes out of it is not going to generate the kind of money to support it. So we bought it fully aware that it was going to require additional investment. But we didn't know, but that $7 to $10 million as a minimum investment for the town to bring it to some sort as a buy-in for a tenant, you know, and say, well, we're going to contribute 10 million and you're going to contribute, you know, however much, and you're going to sign a 10-year lease or something on it. I think that's going to be our best hope. And we'd be lucky to find a tenant that's going to want to make that kind of commitment, because they're just not, you know, what's in it for them, right? They're going to have to be a profit-based enterprise, and we want it for the long haul. So if you were to take $10 million and say, well, that's going to make it, we're going to create something that we don't have to really touch for the next 30 years or something like that, then that's maybe not you know, we're allowed the long haul look where an investor is not going to be can't allow themselves to take that same kind of perspective. So if you amortize it over a 40-year period or a 30-year period, for us, that's going to help our thinking a little bit better. But we always knew that there was going to be some serious cost to make that something else, or somebody else, the other previous owners would have done it and still be enjoying the profit that comes out of it. So I guess that's, you know, I think what we really need to figure out is $10 million and make it into a public space and that people can rent and use, and it's just sort of a small, modest space, and our benefit is the preservation of the property. And that's what we're paying for. And we know that we're going to be essentially subsidizing it on that level. That's going to be one of our main, I think that's probably a viable one, whether it's acceptable to the town. But I think most of the people in the town they just want it to stay there and look nice and maybe have the ability to use it. And so I think that does give them that option. Once you start saying, well, how are we going to get a business in there, a viable business to concern? Well, then they're going to bring their package of what they need, and to make it viable. And again, the most likely one is going to be an event space with whatever accessories, restaurants or whatever else. And that's going to have to be a pretty big group that already does that stuff, you know. So, you know, if you built a hotel with a big, with a big function hall in it and catering and everything like that, you wouldn't have any problem spending 15 million. But so I think we're just going to have to either wrap our head around being the saviors of the structure, and that's the town's purpose, and that's what we have to do, And it's going to look pretty and we'll get some functionality out of it. And that's going to be our, something that the beauty of it, like an open space or whatever else is what we're buying, or like a town field that requires mowing and maintenance and paving and everything else. And it has a function and that the kids can play soccer on it, or we can go play pickleball or whatever. That same sort of, if everyone's expecting a profit or some sort of, a way out of the money, I think it's an unrealistic expectation without a serious change in the way that property is going to look and function, and I don't know if the town people would they be for that, or are they just, I don't know. I just think there's an unjustifiable expectation that there's something, economically viable coming out of that. I don't, you don't expect the same thing from a pasture or a field or some other open space or historical. We fix the library. We don't expect the library to pay us back, to create some kind of revenue stream out of it beyond, the books. So we have to think along that lines and get the town to think along that line. So if we want to start that dialogue with the town, with what you're talking about, we have to start framing the solution and the answer and the program as, hey, we've got a game plan going forward on what restoration needs to happen. That's a great thing, because that's all we've ever wanted, is it to be beautiful and to get some enjoyment out of it. And it's going to be the town living room for the next 40 years. And that's what we're going to build.
I think the voters at the time assumed that, there was always going to be a town investment side, not that it was being bought to turn into a profitable enterprise, so to speak. But, the level that it appears to be taking to get it into a viable thing is obviously beyond what was anticipated. Just one other thing that was popping into my head. I've always been somewhat fascinated by the number of retail businesses and small retail developments that pop up in Northborough, and they all seem to survive, at least for the most part. And to Todd or Norm, do you recall in the discussions that, was consideration given to that it would be a multi-unit retail area? Obviously, again, adding potential other building space, but did anyone envision that, where the White Cliffs original building was only part of a multi-retail area, and it became like a little mini mall? And
Yeah, that one doesn't ring. That one I hadn't seen before, John.
I think it was probably discounted pretty early on that there's not a lot of demand for retail space anywhere. And it sort of gets back to that commercial leasing thing, right? Because retail is still commercial leasing, and there's just not enough demand that someone's going to go build it and hope that they come.
Stop and Shop.
Right. I think if you could turn it into an Amazon distribution center, we might have more success.
Well, they got the deep pockets that Norm was talking about. So
Well,
perhaps we missed an
there's some
opportunity.
people we need to ask questions about. But Todd was very thorough tonight. He really brought back where we are today, what we've been through trying to do the evaluations. I appreciate what Todd did tonight.
Kathy, do you have anything to add from the town staff side? New ideas or thoughts?
No, nothing additional from what I've said.
Okay. Are there more meetings planned of the White Cliffs committee?
Quite certain.
There's nothing on the agenda right now.
Okay. Well, I can only conclude that for this year's town meeting, we'll hope that it's a sunny day and that people are more thrilled with pickleball being on the agenda. And we'll be able to brush through the White Cliffs bond funding question without too much pushback. But it does interest me where it's going to go, and that I'm sure CPA will play some role. But as Todd mentioned earlier, right now we take one third of our yearly revenue and we put it right to the White Cliffs. Now that was our calculation that we could afford that, and it's been working out. We still have a reserve. It's not restricted us from doing any other projects that have come up so far. But it will be it's a question to come up, I guess, as the master plan gets started to discuss in implementation. It'll be, part of it. Does it just keep hanging out there when other more important matters get addressed? So,
I mean,
we
I
can
think
probably-
you've got some ammunition, John, that the committee met and they did the due diligence of searching out what it takes, and we've outlined the options that we have, and now it's really we're moving to the next phase, which is seeking out people or organizations and or investment that can take it to an active space. So it's not like there hasn't been anything, and that certainly gives you a success that it's watertight. It's preserved in its space. We've outlined what needs to be done from a code point of view, and now we've got the options, and we got to go find what the market is for these options. And once that's done, once there is a much more strategic focus, then you can, or a tenant kind of an active partner involved, then the direction takes itself. So I don't think it hasn't like there isn't a solution. Obviously everyone wants it happen quick, but you've got ammunition in your court.
Thank you for bringing me back to the bright side. I'll try to be more optimistic. I have no other business then on White Cliffs myself. Anyone else with parting words on the subject? We can table it. As for the other articles, I think they are straightforward. We don't have a large slate. I'm pretty certain the rec application for pickleball will be well supported, and pretty certain conservation fund will be well supported, and the other items are pretty small, so I don't expect any obstacles at town meeting. Is there any other new business whatsoever before the committee? Then I think we're good, and I don't see a need to meet until next fall unless something comes up. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Excellent. I'll take a quick roll call vote just to give us something to do. Leslie,
Yes.
Millie,
Yes.
Andy Dowd,
Andy lost his connection.
no problem.
He texted me to let me know that happened.
Okay, Peter,
You betcha.
Todd,
Yes.
Andy Clark,
Yes.
and me too.